Hello and welcome to Fresh and Foraged in French. I'm your host, Carolyn Dugas, and today we're going to be burrowing into the subterranean world of the potato, the apple of the earth, to create a flavorful potato salad seasoned with the much despised invasive plant known as ground ivy. Now, I've known for a while that ground ivy is technically edible, but it has such a strong, pungent flavor that I really had trouble figuring out what in the world to pair it with that it would complement instead of fight. And then one day, I was sitting there, minding my own business, when a spud of inspiration fell from the sky and clunked me on the noggin. Potato salad! Or really anything with potatoes. Ground ivy can be affectionately described as having a pungent, earthy, or even strongly dirt-like taste that pairs really well with the dirt lumps that are known as potatoes. They really are a match made in heaven. So if you've ever struggled to scarf down some ground ivy, try it out in this recipe. I think you'll be quite surprised. It showcases a side of this strongly disliked weed that is easy to miss. So join me today as we learn how to identify this uniquely flavored invasive herb, and then saunter on over to the kitchen where we will prepare a frankly delectable French-style potato salad, which means we're dialing up the herbs and we're dialing down the mayonnaise so much that it's not even in the recipe, because we're using a tasty Dijon vinaigrette instead. Move over, bland potato salad. Your wild and untamed counterpart is here to stay. Ground ivy is a creeping perennial herb that loves damp, shady spots, at the edge of gardens and yards and even woodlands. Due to its creeping nature, it tends to form dense mats of leaves, often taking over the ground, which is where its alias, gill-over-the-ground, comes from. Now, ground ivy is on many people's most wanted lists, and as so, it has many fitting aliases to help it travel incognito around the world. Besides ground ivy and gill-over-the-ground, you can also find it booking hotels under the names of Creepin' Charlie, Cat's Foot, and even Alehoof. Now, Alehoof is a throwback to the wild and free beer brewing days of humanity, before hops was proclaimed to be the official beer plant. Ground ivy is both bitter and aromatic, much like hops, and it is literally a weed, so it was quite accessible to brew with for the home brewer. Now, the hoof part of Alehoof comes from the hoofy shape of the leaves, as if some crazed tiny horse was galloping all over a very specific corner of your lawn, marking its territory with its tiny green hoof prints. Now that we know some good common names for ground ivy, let's get botanizing. Ground ivy, also known as Glechoma hederacea, is a member of the marvelous mint family, and it is not in fact an ivy, as its common name would suggest. Now, the mint family is a great one to know because it contains so many delightful and delicious plants, and it has an easy family identification pattern. Its main distinctive features are having a square stem, opposite leaves, and aromatic leaves. Now, when a plant has a square stem, it means that if you slice a cross-section of the stem, it'll be square-shaped as opposed to circular, and oftentimes, if you roll the stem between your fingertips, you can feel its 4 distinct edges. Having opposite leaves means that for every leaf growing out of the stem, there's one right on the other side. They come in pairs. And lastly, if you crush the leaves, they'll release an aroma. Now, it's not always going to be a pleasant one, but it will always be very strong smelling. In the case of ground ivy, it smells a little like dirt. Some other members of this family that you might be familiar with are rosemary, basil, sage, lemon balm, and lavender. Now, if you're curious, go and check out the square stems and opposite leaves of these common culinary plants. Now, onto some ground ivy specific ID tips. First off, its opposite leaves have a roundish kidney shape with scalloped or round-toothed edges. When I think of round-toothed, I think of somebody sanding down an extra pointy tooth. Who knows if they're a dentist or not? Now, each of these leaves can be found on long leaf stalks, also known as petioles. And in the springtime, several blue mint family style flowers will blossom from the area in between the leaf stalks and the stems, which are known as the axils. One of the key points about this plant is that it is a creeper. It likes to send out runners, which will root down at the leaf nodes. This is its main way of spreading, and also why it tends to form such dense mats over the ground. A little running over here, some running over there, and see the whole ground is covered in ground ivy. It might look like these opposite leaves are just sprouting up from the ground in the dense mat, but if you give them a little tug, you should see that they're all actually attached to the same rooted stem. For this recipe, you're going to need a few handfuls of leaves, about a quarter cup when finely minced. So get plucking, and I'll meet you in the kitchen. Hello, and welcome to my kitchen. Today we'll be learning how to transform this pungent and disliked weed into a flavorful French-style potato salad. As I mentioned before, I think that ground ivy pairs delightfully with potatoes. They're a match made in dirt-flavored heaven! And although I'm not going to be covering IG tips for sochan today, I like to throw in a few minced sochan leaves, which have a sort of earthy but floral flavor that pairs well with the ground ivy and the potatoes. They really bring out the best in each other. Now, if you don't have any sochan, fear not. You can just leave it out, or you can replace it with a mild green, such as violet leaf. This recipe is adapted from a French potato salad recipe by America's Test Kitchen. You can find more details, including my ground ivy potato salad recipe, at freshandforaged.com. Now, because ground ivy grows so closely to the ground, we have to take some care when preparing it for a dish. Yes, it has a delicious earthy taste, but we do not want any actual dirt hitchhiking into this dish. So if you can, try and pick the runners that haven't rooted down yet, since they aren't so close to the ground, or just pluck the individual leaves up top. Once you've got your leaves, toss them in a bowl with some water, give them a good swirl, and then let the dirt settle to the bottom for a few minutes. Then you'll want to scoop out the leaves from the top, shake them off, give them a little squeeze, and set them to dry on a paper towel. This should ensure that your leaves are dirt-free and ready to roll. To make our potato salad, we're going to start with about 2 pounds of small red potatoes and slice them 1/4 of an inch thick. No need to peel. Then toss them in a large saucepan and add enough water to give them a little bubble room, covering them by about 1 inch. Stir in 2 tablespoons of salt to season the taters whilst they cook. Then bring it to a boil, reduce to a simmer, and cook for about 6 minutes, or until the taters are tender, and you can pierce them easily with a paring knife. Now don't drain them quite yet. You need to scoop out 1/4 cup of the potato water, which we will use to thin out the vinaigrette, and set it aside in a small bowl. Then you can drain the potatoes and place them in a bowl which is large enough to give them a little good stir. Now we've got some naked potatoes on our hands, so unless you want everyone to avert their eyes at the dinner table, we better start dressing them. Those of you with an interest in skincare are probably already familiar with this concept, but basically, after their hot, steamy potato bath, the pores of the potatoes will open and can more readily absorb the dressing, making them even more flavorful. So we've got to dress them while they're hot. For the dressing, we're going to add 1 minced clove of garlic, 4 tablespoons of olive oil, 1½ tablespoons of white wine vinegar, 2 teaspoons of Dijon mustard, and 1/2 teaspoon of freshly ground black pepper to the bowl with the potato water. Whisk until it's combined, then drizzle over the cooked potatoes, making sure that the dressing is evenly distributed. Then let the taters bask in the flavor and absorb the dressing for about 10 minutes. Now, after the potatoes are adequately flavored with their tasty dressing, we're going to finish the whole shebang off with 1 finely minced shallot, medium size, 1/4 cup of finely minced ground ivy, and 3 tablespoons of minced sochan greens. Now, it is really important to finely mince the ground ivy because the leaves have a peculiar texture that can be unpleasant to chomp down upon. But if you mince them fine enough, you'll get all the flavor and nobody will know about that weird texture of the ground ivy leaves. So there you have it. I find that this potato salad is tastiest when warm, but you can also store it in the fridge and then bring it back to room temperature before serving. Now let's give it a little taste and see how it turned out. Earthy? Sour? Amazing! Bon appetit. I hope you've enjoyed this new way to eat the sometimes difficult to work with and extremely invasive ground ivy. Next time, instead of spraying it with pesticides, you can chop some up for your wild and free potato salad. Let me know in the comments if this recipe has converted you from a ground ivy hater to a ground ivy sometimes enjoyer. Now if you've enjoyed this video, please be sure to like and subscribe as we explore more flavorful foraging content featuring abundant and invasive weeds. Happy foraging!